Hey there, dear listeners. Recently, I had a very interesting conversation with Vona Johnson of the Courageous Retirement podcast, and we spoke about the benefits of telling your story and what it does for you, what it does for your brain, what it does for your life, what it means to leave a legacy, and why it is important to invest in this and to do this right. And we spoke about how to unlock the stories that are hidden inside of you somewhere. I am sure that also for my own audience, this podcast will be useful and interesting. So I upload it here. I hope you enjoy this podcast. And as a reminder, every week I send out an email with very useful tips and advice and inspiration for nonfiction writers. And you can get a free coaching call with me if you subscribe to my email list. So go to www.yourbeststory.net, yourbeststory.net, and subscribe to my email list. Okay, here is the podcast with Vona Johnson.
I am excited to have this conversation today because we all have a story in us. I mean, just in the few minutes leading up to this conversation, Niels and I talked about some of our backstories and how we met our spouses and things like that. And so we all have a story somewhere to tell, but we don't all realize how important it is to get that out. When I met Niels and we started having this conversation, I realized that this is something, even if you're sitting here listening to this and you're thinking, I'm not an author, I don't like to write, I can't write, I want you to stay with us today because I think this is something that could really change the way that you look at your life and your legacy. Niels, let's jump in. First of all, welcome. I am so excited to have you here today,
Thank you.
all the way from the other side of the world. How amazing is our technology that we can have a conversation when we're on opposite ends of the world?
Yeah, the sun has just come up there and it's soon going to go down here. So it's we're really on different sides of the world. Yeah.
Niels and I met in a C-Suite for Christ gathering one day, and because we both write or are authors, we connected, and there are just so many interesting things to talk about. You know, where you're from. I have so many questions, and I've had the opportunity to ask some of those, but I just really, really love this idea of writing our story. Niels, will you tell us, why is it important that we get our story written and do it in a way that will have meaning for folks?
Well, first of all, why we would write it is we want to leave a legacy to the people who come after us, our children, our grandchildren. We want to, especially when you are retired, you have the time to write these things down. And there might come a time that you're not there anymore. And I know how precious it is to have something then. My mother passed away a few years ago, and I still have some written works by her hand, you know. And just having that is such a treasure. So I can open it and read some of it and hear her voice in my head and discover some of the things that she was thinking. I mean, I have this little book that she wrote when she was a teenager. So I hear her voice, but also some things that betray this youthfulness still. And it's just such a treasure to have. So especially nowadays when everything has become email and messages and so, we are often not making anything lasting anymore. When we write something down, we really put effort into writing the story. Then you can put it into a book or even written by hand. You have something to give and some way to share with children and grandchildren, or if it is a bigger story that is relevant for more people, you can actually publish it in a real book. But the thing is, if you write for other people and not for yourself, then you have to make sure that it is comprehensible and that it is engaging. Because if it is very dull or very boring or way too much or whatever, then it is nice maybe to read a little bit now and then to have this voice and this experience of having the person close by. But very few people will read the whole thing and go through the entire experience. So that's a matter of courtesy. Are you writing for yourself, or are you writing for the person who reads it? Are you writing for your reader? And if you are writing for the reader, then good writing is actually the taking away of obstacles to comprehension and engagement. And there are many things in just normal writing. When you just sit down to write, you are actually putting a lot of obstacles in front of your reader that make it impossible to be really engaged in the story, because, well, real storytelling demands planning and demands understanding of literary devices and that sort of thing. So the question is always, for whom are you writing? For yourself or for others? And if you want to write for others, there is a whole lot to learn. And learning this stuff is a lot of fun. I mean, if you see your own scenes develop on the page, you realize that you're working on something special. And learning that, the whole process is great.
Well, and I mentioned that I've been toying with the idea of writing fiction, and I love how what you're saying actually goes right along with the gentleman that I've followed along that lines. And two things, you talked about writing scenes, and it's important to keep the scene tight, right? You don't, like you said, you don't want to just dump everything right there. I love the concept of give them what they need when they need it. You don't start at the beginning and just tell it chronologically. You tell them as it comes up. Is that, I mean, I assume that's kind of part of your process too, right?
Yeah. There are different ways of telling a story. You can start in the middle of the action and then take some backstory, or you can start at the beginning. But it is always important to be very deliberate in every decision that you make. If you start from the very beginning, there has to be something to tell about the beginning. There must be something worth telling. So if you want to start with your birth, the day of your birth, then there better be something going on then, you know? Yeah. For example, I could maybe start with the day of my birth because apparently I was born with the umbilical cord a couple of times around my neck. So it was the midwife. He was under the shower, so she couldn't come. So there was a lot going on that night. So if I would start my story on the day of my birth, on the night of my birth, then I would actually have something to say.
Right.
Whether it is interesting, that is for other people to decide. And I might have to talk with an editor about that. But most births are just that, you know, and there's no action. The point is you want to lure the reader in such a way that they are immediately, boom, in the middle of something so that they want to know what's going to come next. Yes,
I love that. But I'm guessing that most of the people that will be listening to this are thinking, I don't want to write a book. That's not a goal of mine. So, I mean, we've already talked about the fact that we want to write it for that legacy piece. And when you were speaking, it occurred to me that I'm working on a project where a woman just started her own personal journey after she had discovered she had dementia. And so I'm working with a group. Her family's given us permission to actually publish this so that other people can learn from that experience. And so that's maybe a little bit different than what you're talking about, but I think it brings home the point that those words of hers are precious to not just her family, who now can understand what she was going through, but even me, who I have both of my parents with dementia. And just to have that insight into what she was going through helps me understand a little better what they're going through. So, like I said, there's always a benefit somewhere. And if God has nudged us towards that, we should heed that.
Yeah, exactly. It can be very redemptive for other people, but also for yourself. I mean,
tell us more about that.
Writing can really help you process things, you know, things that have been painful, trauma, or certain questions you still have to work through. Writing is actually thinking on paper, and really taking the time to think through things can really help clear things up, and also really help to give relief from pain. So even if you have no intentions whatsoever to publish anything, it can be such a good thing for your soul and for your brain, for your mind to write these things down, even just in longhand, so that maybe you have a handwriting that nobody can read. It doesn't matter. It is about putting it down on paper, and in a way you entrust it to to God also. I can write in prayer basically, and I think that is it has so many benefits for your soul, for your brain, and for your own thinking. I mean, you use, when you write and structure your thoughts, you're using the executive functions of your brain, and that is really healthy to do. Even if you don't want to publish anything, it's still a very good thing to do. And sometimes that may lead to the discovery of things that are worth sharing. And so it wouldn't be the first time that somebody was just free writing and figures out, like, hey, wait a second, I do have something to say. I have something to tell, to share.
Well, I really like that. And I can think of many times when I've had a conversation with a friend who, something that's been troubling them for some time. And at the end of the conversation, they'll say something like, I don't know why I just told you that, but I just feel so much better having said it. And
Right.
the way you explained it is you could get that same benefit from writing it down, just to process it. And you realize that you can almost like reflect and realize that you were holding on to things.
I spoke with a therapist once. It might actually be one that I edited a book for. I'm not entirely certain anymore. But the recommendation in that book was to write down from the place of hurt, write down the traumatic experiences, and then burn the paper.
Yeah.
And then that should then be. It's of course a symbolic act, but it's sort of. You burn that thing. You don't want that to determine anything in your life anymore. So, and that is also not only the act of writing there, but also the act of burning it. But still, it is clear that when you write things down, you loosen it up. You create new space.
Yeah, I love that. So tell me, Niels, how did you get to this point where you are now helping? I assume you're editing and coaching, and I mean, helping people through that whole process. How did you get there? What got you started on this path?
Yeah, this is somewhat of an unusual job. I've always wanted to be a writer, I think. There have been times in my life that I wanted to be all kinds of things, from I wanted to be a famous drummer, and I wanted to do all kinds of things, but becoming a writer was something that kept coming back. But I guess I never had the confidence that I could do it until at some point my hostess in Jerusalem said, hey, you are very talented. I think you should do a course. And I thought, okay, it's cool that you tell me that I'm talented, but do I need to do a course? That means that I'm bad, right? Well, not at all. Of course, this is a craft that you have to learn. So I learned there from my hostess that writing is not something you are born with. It is not a talent that you naturally have, usually. It is something you have to learn. So I learned it at the Institute for Writers. And a few years later, when I made Aliyah, when I came to live in Israel, I got the opportunity to work for an editing company from America. Is working from home. So I had to do a test, and it was really, really good. So I performed very well in that test. And so a few weeks later, I worked as an editor, and I wanted to be a writer, but okay, editor is nice too, so why not? Later, when I began to get somewhat bored with agency work, I decided to start for myself. And then I got to work on Christian books. And that is actually, let's say, quote unquote, coincidental, because my stepbrother started a publishing company at the very same moment without we had no idea, so another stepbrother said, hey, maybe you can help each other out. I'm like, oh, okay, why not? So now I've been working for that publisher for quite a few books already. I began to see that many of the books that I worked on from different customers had very similar issues, and I realized that, an editor works after. Once the manuscript is done, an editor takes all the mistakes out and tries to fix whatever is broken. But I realized that many of the errors were caused by mistakes at the beginning of the process. If I could just hop on earlier in the process, I would be able to do much more for the writers. So I began to think, well, maybe I can teach writing. Maybe I can coach writers to do it right from the beginning, so that once they have their final manuscript, that lands on the editor's desk, the editor has to do much less work, and that is much cheaper then.
Sure.
So that's how I got to coaching. And this is what I'm trying to set up. So in the meantime, I'm still mostly editing.
Okay. Well, that's really fascinating. Where were you when I started writing?
How long ago is that?
It's funny because I too always wrote. I was writing poems. I was writing my journals. I was, just writing stories for different things. In fact, I started writing my book in around 2020. So 5 years ago.
Okay,
Yeah.
Around that time, I was at the University of Washington to study editing.
Okay.
Because when I started my own company, I thought, now I want to know, I want to really know how this world works of editing. Because when you are working for an agency, you have this this framework that they use, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it is professional editing, and you learn quite a lot, but still you have no idea how other companies are doing it. So I went to University of Washington to really learn how to edit for in all kinds of different settings, and so by the time you started writing, I think I was just finished then.
Yeah.
So we could have helped you out.
I worked with a company that kind of was kind of a hybrid between self-publishing and the traditional publishing path. Definitely was not professionally edited by someone like you, who probably could have really enhanced my book. And
that's really a problem in publishing nowadays, that publishers usually often are not offering really quality editing anymore, because it's just expensive.
Right.
But if you want to do that for your own book, then it is not less expensive, but you have to pay it all from your own pocket,
Right.
So this is also actually a reason for me to offer this coaching. Like, the coaching also costs money. It's not cheap, but you learn how to prepare your documents in such a way that the editor does not have so much work on it anymore. Because editing becomes extremely expensive when the more necessary it is, the more expensive it also becomes. So, and the less inclined the writer is to actually hire those services.
Right.
So, and that is a problem. So the worst writers are just publishing without any kind of editing. And that is a pity, because it makes really that these stories sometimes are just unreadable. You cannot get engaged by it because it is repetitious. It is long-winded. It is, the problems.
Yes.
It's also very difficult then to find self-published books that are really quality. Like, how do you know which books are good? Because there are so many books published that are actually difficult to read.
But I think the point is still there. Whether someone that's listening right now wants to publish and go through that whole process, or if they just want to get the story down. When you were talking about your mother or your grandmother had written a story.
Oh, who passed away?
Yeah.
Okay, it was not a story. It was just a
journal. Okay, well, but similar, because I have, and it's really cool. If I'd have known we were going to go here, I would have grabbed it. But my grandmother did just like a little notebook. It's about this big. And when back in the 20s, she and a girlfriend took her Model A and traveled from South Dakota to California. Now, back then, two women, that was unheard of for them to take off and travel on their own. I mean, literally, she dressed as a man so that they could do this without attention drawn to them. But she kept, in this little notebook, she kept track of where they were every day, what they were doing. And that little notebook is priceless to me.
Absolutely,
because, in fact, I want to do that trip someday, and would like to even figure out a way of like publishing a book around that story and the journey. That I think
that might be very interesting indeed. Yeah. Especially if there are life stories that you can connect to it to give it extra depth. I can see that becoming a very interesting book indeed.
Oh yeah, she has some life stories that she she was the independent woman before her time, and just did all the things. So it was a great role model to have. She was my first best friend, and it was truly a gift. But again, we all have those people in our lives that we wish we knew more about, right? And we can give them that gift. We can write those stories. And why not use some of the things that you're talking about?
I think much is also, I think some people also have trouble with actually remembering stories and so on. Like, well, how did things happen and what was it exactly? And so when I'm coaching, I'm also paying attention to that, that like, how do you find these stories? It's unlocking these stories inside of you. And I would like to give 3 short tips for this.
Well, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
One thing I'm really fan of doing is just taking long walks and actually talk to yourself. Speak through the things. You could call it a prayer or just thinking aloud, but just go to childhood and speak to yourself. Speak through these things, because I think that is better than just thinking, because you are more conscious of the train of thought that you're following. And you can discover a lot of interesting things about your life if you very consciously think through them. And another way of doing that, and that is then the second tip, is free writing. It means that you just start writing without actually having a goal with it. And you don't really know where you're going. You just write what comes to mind. And sometimes you go layer after layer deeper into the stuff that lives inside of you. And you can unlock stories that way that you completely forgotten about. So you can do that with a Word document or pen on paper. But the point is, keep writing for a certain amount of time or until you're empty, and just discover what is in there, what comes out. And then the third one that I find extremely helpful, and actually it helped me also remember all kinds of things that I completely forgot, is to draw a map of places where you have lived. For example, the house you grew up in, and all of the streets surrounding that house, and all the houses that you remember being there, and the bridge and the pond and the park, and mentally walk through all these places and just basically look around and see what happened in those places. What happened there? Well, hey, that old lady over there, she always gave me cookies. Hey, why was I there? Because she had this and that. And when I'm drawing a map of some place where I lived, and you can do it with every time frame of your life, then these memories begin to come up. When you draw this little house on the map with the little pathway and the street and where the cars are parked, then all these memories slowly begin to pop up, and you can write them down as just, for all I care, on the map in a few words. Describe the memory that is linked to that place. And then later you can take those little fragments of memory and free write about them to find out more. And then sometimes you can rediscover all kinds of things, like how people were looking, why they were, how they were standing, what they were saying. You can discover a whole lot of things by just trying to see it again. And a map can be extremely helpful.
I love those ideas. That last one especially really is a fascinating concept. I think that would be really, really helpful. I found in my writing, they talk about, getting into the zone, and, it's like getting all the outside world interruptions aside. And when I got to writing, it was like just filled with the Holy Spirit. And I mean, there would be times I would go back and be editing and reading through what I wrote, and I would be like, wow, I wrote that? Mm-hmm. Where did that come from? Right. And that in itself is just an amazing gift. Before we had this conversation, we both separately prayed about this conversation. You mentioned it, and I didn't, but I absolutely was. I always do. And I think that that's a great tip for anyone, but whether they're going into a conversation or whether they're sitting down to write or whatever, but to just pray and ask the Holy Spirit guide
yeah.
those thoughts. And
Right. Actually, my coaching is divided into 6 action steps. And the first one is simply aligning your heart with God's heart. It is making sure that your mission in life is to do what God wants you to do, because from that you can find subjects to write about and your mission, etc. If you write from a desire to please God and to write the things that He wants you to write about, you start off on such a good basis.
yeah, I can see where I could benefit from your coaching. When do we start?
No, maybe we've started already.
Maybe we have. This has been so enlightening. I've just really enjoyed this. And I know that we've only hit the tip of the iceberg. And that's okay, because we don't want to give all your secrets away in this conversation. If someone listening to this was like, I need this, I'm right where God needs me this moment, and I need to take the next step, how could they work with you? How could they take that next step?
Well, there are a few things. First of all, I have an email list that every week I try to send some good tips, some good advice to all my subscribers. And also it comes with a free writing course where I give also some of the best of my advice. My advice in general is free. What is not free is my actual hands-on help. So I also offer 1 hour free coaching sessions. The first hour is always free, and I'm going to do everything to help you unlock these stories and to develop a pathway forward. And if then you don't want to work with me, no problem whatsoever. This hour is for you, to help you. And those are a few things you could do. Join my mailing list, and when you do so, I offer you also a free coaching session. And well, within that coaching session, I might also recommend some books that are perfect to start with. My website is www.yourbeststory.net. Yourbeststory.net.
I love it. That's a great website.
It also reflects my desire. It's my desire to help you write your best story. Yeah. And sometimes I'm praying for my company and I mention your best story, and I think, wow, I hope that my life will also be God's best story. Then I mean my life, our lives. That we as believers may reflect God's best story. So it's a multi-layered name, you could say.
I love that. I really do. So as we wrap up this conversation, and I think we could go on for a very long time, as we wrap up, is there any last word of advice that you would give our listeners today? Anything that you would want to drive home before they take off? Yeah,
I think what I had a whole list of things I had wanted to say, but I think the most important thing is dare to be authentic. I think that is what anybody who reads your work wants, is they want to read about a person, somebody who's not hiding behind difficult words or theories, or who is not presenting the subject from a distance, but who is really speaking about everything from their own experiences, from their own feelings, so that people who read your work will really read a person's story. And yeah, that's it. Authenticity is super important.
Well, it is. And I think, we have, our world in general has this tendency to want to polish things up and make them pretty before we present them. And what I hear you saying is don't make that your focus.
No, focus on presenting your story as powerfully as possible, but be very vulnerable in what you say. I think that is this vulnerability, and that is the way to people's hearts. And indeed, to present a better version of yourself, it's not helping anybody, right?
Well, and I think that's great advice for whether we're writing our story or having a conversation or anything that we do, to just be ourselves and be vulnerable. And yeah, I love that. And I'll bring it all the way back to the beginning of the conversation. There are times when we don't need to bring the whole dump truck, right?
Right, absolutely. Yeah, That's one of the things too. One of my main focal points when I coach is figure out what do you want to say and exclude everything that does not have to do with this main message, this main thesis that you're trying to bring across. So learn to exclude things. Learn to really to pinpoint what you want to say and make sure that every chapter that you write works to convey that one message. Because readers can get lost, right? Literally, they can be completely lost in a book that, well, actually, when people say I got lost in that book, they often mean something positive. I mean that they just don't know anymore where it's going, you know? And that is, I think, danger number one when you start writing without a plan. So make sure that you know what you're going to say and then create a plan as to how to get there so that your reader knows that they are in good hands.
Oh, I think that is excellent advice and a really great place to end this conversation. Niels, I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy day. And now that you're wrapping up your busy day, but anyway, thank you so much for sharing this wisdom. I'm excited to continue to learn and grow in my writing with you. So thank you so much. Take care.
My pleasure. And good luck with your own writing and with your fiction. If you have any questions, then you know where to find me.
I do. Thank you.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
So I'm curious, what stories are you thinking that you maybe should write down? Is God nudging you in that direction? I encourage you to put into practice some of the tips and strategies that Niels offered today and see if God won't help you write that story. If he brought you to it, he will help you get it down on paper. And who knows whose lives you will touch by writing down those stories that he has laid on your heart and those messages, that inspiration to help others know that they can trust him and lean on him. So I just want to thank you for stopping by today. I hope you'll come back in a couple of weeks. We're going to take a little bit different approach and start talking about how we can finish well as we near retirement. What does it look like to wrap things up nicely and finish well? I hope you'll come back for that. In the meantime, I pray that you will always engage your faith, live your more in this beautiful time of courageous retirement. God bless.